Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Tonight, I would like to focus on discussing, commenting on a recent interview that Dhara B gave with Jealous Mawarire. A quick introduction. This gentleman, Jealous Mawarire, came on the national political stage. At least the first time I heard of him was in 2013. It was soon after SADC had called a special summit in which the SADC leaders were asking that the Zimbabwe elections due that year should be postponed until meaningful reforms were implemented to ensure the elections were free, fair, and credible. This was at the tail end of the 2008 to 2013 GNU, when it was clear to SADC and anybody else that as much as the primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to make sure that the blatant vote rigging and cheating that had taken place in 2008 would never be repeated again. The tragic reality is not even one meaningful token reform had been implemented. The 2013 new constitution the GNU had passed was a feeble document. It was never going to deliver free, fair, and credible elections or hold the people's fundamental freedoms and rights. And so SADC, because SADC was the guarantor of the global political agreement in 2008, SADC decided that they would call a special meeting, SADC meeting, in which both ZANU-PF and the two opposition factions, one led by Morgan Tsvangirai and the other one led by Welshman Ncube, they were told that the elections should be postponed until meaningful reforms are implemented. That was the bottom line. Initially, ZANU-PF pretended that they agreed with that when they left Maputo. But by the time they got back to Zimbabwe, they changed their position. As far as they were concerned, the elections should go ahead. Of course, ZANU-PF wanted the elections to go ahead because it was in their advantage that no meaningful reforms had been implemented during the GNU. They still had their dictatorial powers to rig the elections. And that worked to the regime's advantage. There can be no denying of that. And so the regime's position was, how can we wriggle out of this one? They tried two fronts. The first one was they got their Minister of Justice and Parliamentary Affairs, the SANU-PF, Patrick Chinamasa. He called a conference which all the SADC ambassadors and others were invited, plus the journalists. And at that conference, the SANU-PF said they were not going to postpone the elections because there were no outstanding reforms to be implemented. And it was, of course, the first time the SANU-PF was to reveal that there was not only no outstanding reforms to be implemented, but most significantly, that no reform proposals had ever been submitted in Parliament. Not even one in the 5 years of the GNU. So to postpone the elections on the grounds that we want to implement reforms is nonsensical. When you say what reforms? What reforms? It was a masterful presentation. I think SADC realized it as well. But just to be on the safe side, the ZANU-PF also had Jealous Mawarire, our friend, submit a court challenge challenging the postponing of the elections on the basis that the Constitution of Zimbabwe said there should be regular elections every 5 years, whatever it is. And the government had absolutely no excuse for postponing the elections. In the end, the court proceedings, as far as I remember, did not go ahead because I think then ZANU-PF realized, or rather SADC realized, this was it would be a meaningless fight. You can't challenge the government on that issue and push for reforms when there are no reforms that have been submitted in 5 years. So are we going to start proposing new reforms now to be implemented while we postpone the elections? If there had been any desire to implement reforms, why haven't we submitted the reform proposals all this time? So I think SADC realized it was a lost cause. And the opposition, for their part, decided they were going to participate in the elections anyway. So the court proceeding, I think, was unnecessary. But this is the background to who Jealous Mawarire is. And now to go back to the interview that he gave with Dhara B. I'll play clips of that interview and comment what my thoughts are. And then we'll play another clip. .
close this year is just to have a helicopter view of what really mattered for people in this past year that we're leaving behind, and then we look into the future.
What really mattered for us, and what really matters for us, is the attempt by the president and his political party to illegally extend his stay in office. I think there's nothing bigger than that, because that has fundamental implications to the political stability of the country, to the economic stability of the country. So we cannot never discuss anything else other than the illegal attempt by the president to extend his stay in office until 2030. That's what we need to discuss. And that has been the preoccupation even of his political party. And that has been the preoccupation of his political party, because if you look at the October ZANU-PF conference in Mutare, the first resolution was to mandate the leader of government in parliament to expedite moves to change the constitution and allow the president to illegally stay in office until 2030. So that's what we need to discuss. And that's why I was saying we need to discuss it with considerations to the factors that are mitigating, the factors that are helping the president or nudging the president to want to extend his stay in office beyond the constitutional limit of 2028. That's why I say there is a political dimension to that. There is a business dimension to that, a business quasi-criminal intention to that. But there is also a religious, occultic explanation to why he wants to stay in power. And that religious and occultic explanation hasn't been exhaustively discussed within the political discourse on why the president wants to stay in office beyond 2030. Because if you look at it from the outside, you say this is an 80-something-year-old person. Why does he want to stay in power beyond 2028? Is there any logical reason why he needs to stay in office? And all the reasons that are there are not logical. So there should be something illogical that is very compelling for him, which is making him want to stay in office. And that's the religious aspect that I said I wanted to explain. And what I want to explain here is that this president that we have, is deeply involved in occultism, is deeply involved in the issues, the mashikiro and stuff. And these mashikiros are people who have actually found a niche. Remember, everyone else is forming a group and exploiting the naivety of our president to say we want to support you, we want to make sure that you stay in office. Hence, we now have footballers and ex-football coaches association for ED. You have all these various groups for ED. So there is a coterie also of sangomas, of these mashikeros, who have been telling the president that he has to stay in office. He has to be in office for at least 12 years. And these 12 years are supposed to be a year for every year that, a year for every Mutapa that has reigned over the Rosary Kingdom in the southern part of Zimbabwe, in Masvingo. So the president is intending to extend his stay in office to 2030 so that he gets to the 12 years that his Mashikeros are telling him that he should be in office for 12 years, and each year that is in office represents the reign of Emuno Mutapa.
Well, that is interesting. I think his starting point is completely wrong and should be condemned for what it is. He is saying this issue of Mnangagwa trying to extend his stay in office must be the one issue we must all discuss. This is nonsense, of course. ZANU-PF may want us to discuss it, but we don't have to fall for it. I've said on other platforms, in other videos, in this same platform, that Mnangagwa is the one who brought about this issue of staying in power until 2030, soon after the 2023 elections. This was something that he must have thought about. It didn't just occur to him. This was planned way in advance. We should cast back, and I think in this video we'll come back to the elections as well, to the 2023 elections. The 2023 elections were flawed. SADC, the AU, election observers condemned those elections as flawed and illegitimate. I've said it again and again on this platform. Those elections were flawed. And when SADC and the AU condemned them, there was a chance they would deny him political legitimacy as they did in 2008. They did not, in this case, go that far. They did not go that extra mile because the opposition had participated in numbers in those elections. Chamisa had managed to con people to believe that he had plugged the vote rigging loopholes and those elections were going to be, he was going to win those elections. And there was never going to be any doubt about that one. And the people believed those lies. And they participated in those elections on that basis. So it is important to understand that bit. So in this particular case, to say Mnangagwa is illegitimate, that is the reality that he faced. Those elections were not free, fair, and credible. That cannot be debated anymore. What Mnangagwa needed then is a decoy to draw attention away from the 2023 elections and the fact that he is illegitimate. And what better way of doing so than give people a challenge that forget about 2023, I have intentions of staying beyond the 5 years that I've been elected, even now. And people are saying, well, oh, it's bad enough that he's in now, but for him to extend his stay in office beyond 2028 is unacceptable. So 2030 became the focal point. You've taken your eyes from the immediate reality that he is illegitimate. And he has done that successfully. There is no doubt that as soon as Mnangagwa started talking of this 2030, and I remember there was videos of him in Mashingo, somebody singing Mashingo Yati, Shumba, Gawarambe Waripo. That galvanized the nation. His supporters supporting it, and those against it focusing on, oh, you must not change the constitution. And yet people had already forgotten that he was there in government illegitimately. He was illegitimate. So it worked. That point worked. And anyone who refused to see that is failing to see the reality, the political machinations of people like Mnangagwa. Here he is reminding us all that he didn't care about what SADC and the AU election observers said.
Vana vakatuka ZANU-PF kana ini ndonyanyisa kufara kuita zvakanaka. Ukavona vavengi vakwashi kurumbidza nekuchikanganisa. Ukavona vachiti ZANU-PF yakaipa farai. You are doing great things for your country. Hongu takaita ma-elections edu kuna vamwe vaitaura zvisina musoro zvikanzi ma-election anafamba zvakanaka ndezvavo.
That is the political reality. So for somebody to be saying now that that the most important thing we must talk about here is ED 2030 agenda, is to fall for that trap. Yes, of course, Mnangagwa would want to extend it and make it the focal point. According to Mawarire there, he's telling us that one of the reasons why he is so obsessed about it is that his superstitious beliefs, traditional healers, Mashikiro, are telling him that he has got to stay in for 12 years, the magical 12 years, to be to qualify as one of the Varojis, great chiefs, is all superstition. It's all traditional. Mashikiro, as he called it himself, the irrational reason. The question then is, are we accepting the situation where we are saying we have got to now address the irrational reason, the irrational issue as regards the issues that we should be discussing as a nation? And I would argue that in this particular case, we should let Mnangagwa concentrate on those irrational issues and not let ourselves be dragged into any of them. We have no business to be discussing that. I'll go into other details again, but let's hear another short clip of.
If you want to make a full-time income from home working part-time, you need to know this.
Sorry about that.
And repeated this when he had a meeting with the editors at State House, when there was a question that when he was asked if he would be persuaded to extend his term of office, and I quote, I think if my memory still serves me well, he said he was going to persuade the persuaders not to persuade him. And just a few days ago, I had an interview with Wilbert Mbaiwa, the president of the National People's Congress, who said that the people of Zimbabwe must just prepare for an election in 2028. They must not be worried about what ZANU-PF does in its backyard, because at this moment, as long as there's nothing before Parliament, then he's not worried, because that is not something that is official that should be worried. And he believes that the president himself would actually refuse any term extension.
Well, I'm glad that you have actually you have made reference to the Davos CNN interview. It was with CNN, isn't it?
I'm sure it was with CNN,
CNN, yes.
Yeah, it was with CNN. And if you knew that interview was done to run away from a one-term presidency. Because after the 2017 coup and after President Emerson Mnangagwa, if I may call him president, after he lost the election in 2018.
He lost the election. He lost it.
He lost that election.
But Zek says something else. But Zek says he won that election.
Yeah, I'm telling you. After he lost the election, he knows it. And let me tell you what happened. After he lost the election, the generals that had helped him to do the coup in 2017 called him and said that they could not have staged the coup in order to pass on power to the opposition. They had anticipated that he, Mnangagwa, was going to win the election and therefore continue the country on a democratic path. But since he had lost the election, they were going to do another coup. That was another coup which they did to subvert the will of the people, to subvert the outcome of the presidential election in 2018 and install once again Emerson Mnangagwa in power for 1 year, for one term, 1 5-year term. Their argument was that the political party ZANU-PF had won the election, but the presidential candidate had lost the election. So therefore, in order to run away from a coalition government, they were going to stage another coup. This was a soft coup which they staged, imposed Mnangagwa as the winner of the 2018 elections, when in actual fact he had gotten 32%. Made him president on the assurance that within the 5 years, ZANU-PF was supposed to look for a credible candidate who had capacity to win elections in 2023. That was the agreement that Emerson had with the generals, General Chwenga, General Emershau, Shiri, Zimonti, all those other generals who later on succumbed to what was now called COVID. They were there. And they are the ones who had an undertaking, who had an agreement with Emerson that he was going to be a one-term president. And he was going to be a one-term president on the condition that ZANU-PF as a political party was supposed to come up with a candidate that had capacity to win elections, in presidential elections in 2023. Because we had a situation in 2018 where ZANU-PF as a party had won the popular vote, but their presidential candidate had lost the election. So there was an agreement prior to Mnangagwa going to Davos that Mnangagwa was going to be a one-term president. on the basis that he had not won the election in 2018. He was a military imposition in 2018 after the so-called elections. He didn't win the 2018 elections. So the agreement was that he was supposed to be a one-term president.
We'll stop it there. I think this needs to be looked at more closely. According to Jealous Mawarire here, he's now telling us that the election was free, fair, and credible insofar as the parliamentary vote was concerned. That is not true. The election in 2018 was rigged. There was no verified voters' roll. There was no free press. There was no freedom for the opposition to campaign freely. This is the election that Mnangagwa, soon after the coup, had told the world at large, and Zimbabweans in particular, that the elections would be free, fair, and credible. And yet, within weeks, he was giving away chiefs. He was giving chiefs vehicles. A typical thing that ZANU-PF had been doing before, where local traditional leaders like chiefs and village heads were bribed and used as ZANU-PF commissars. The whole campaign of 2008 was geared on the war veterans assuring him that he was going to win big. Because they had reactivated what they did in 2008. Indeed, ZANU-PF's national commissar was none other than Rugenjo, the same general that Jealous was referring to here. He comes from Bikita, I think. And in 2008, he was one of the war veterans that committed a lot of serious human rights violations, including killings during Operation Mafutera Papi. So for somebody to turn around and say the elections were free, fair, and credible, that doesn't make any sense at all. What he could say and people would accept is that as much as the electoral process for the parliamentary votes were not free, fair, and credible, the counting was transparent. But at the counting level, they realized that they needed to top up the votes for Mnangagwa as president. And so they had to do extra vote rigging. We saw that from the court challenge that followed those elections in 2018. One of the interesting bit of that court challenge that emerged was the revelation that there were 16 polling stations with identical votes from Mnangagwa, identical votes for Chamisa and all the other candidates, identical number of spoiled votes. 16 of them. And in all those 16, Mnangagwa not only won, but won big, according to Chamisa's lawyer. The only logical explanation for that was that these results were double entries. They will look at a polling station where Mnangagwa has done very well. They've entered it in totaling up the votes, and they enter it again. And this is also explains why, as was revealed in those court proceedings, why the votes from Mnangagwa or the parliamentary votes exceeded the total number of votes cast in the parliamentary. In the parliamentary, they did not use duplicate V11s. Add those figures again. They needed those. They only did that for the president to top up Mnangagwa's votes. What is interesting also in that story was that the law itself says as soon as the parliamentary votes, the votes have been counted, those involved would put all the material relating to that election in the ballot box, seal it, and sign it. In that ballot box should be available, should there be a court challenge. And in this particular case, the theory that there were duplicate entries here would have been settled if, in this case here, Chamisa's lawyers had turned around and said, no, we want to have those 16 ballot boxes opened. You could duplicate the V11 form and enter the result of that V11 form twice. But you cannot duplicate the polling station. So they would have found there were only 8 sealed ballot boxes. The other 8 did not exist. That is what we are talking about here. In this case here, it was within his right for the Chamisa legal team to demand that the ballot boxes should be opened. But it was them who refused to make that request, claiming that they didn't want to drink from a poisoned well. This only goes to show how the opposition and the ZANU-PF have been cooperating. So the issue that Jealous Mawarire is talking about here, of there being free, fair, and credible election for the parliamentary, that is not true. The parliamentary elections were not free, fair, and credible. But whatever defects that they had, it turned out that was not enough to get Mnangagwa over the line. That is different. Let's listen to a follow-up clip.
But you make a
Why do you
serious,
think ZANU-PF was looking for a presidential candidate for 2023? Emerson agreed to that, only to change that by his announcement on the CNN interview in Davos. That's when he then said he was going to do 10 years. He was going to do 2 terms. That message was not meant for the CNN. That message was a rebellious act from the agreement that Emerson had with the generals. It was directed at the generals. That's the reason why Emerson and his children had to pay a fixer, 600,000 United States dollars to get that CNN interview.
Bad credit, it doesn't make you a bad person, and it shouldn't stop you from owning up.
Well, that may well have been the case. But I think what we need to look at here is the reality of that the ZANU-PF know they have to rig elections, parliamentary as well as presidential elections. That is the difference. So in this particular case, the argument that is being made here is that he had made an agreement to serve only 1 term with Chiwenga and the other generals. It may have been an internal one, but we have got to understand and emphasize that these individuals, ZANU-PF, had no intention of holding free, fair, and credible elections. The elections were not free, fair, and credible. There's another bit where he talks about the 2018 elections as being free, fair, and credible again. I think I'll just quickly scroll to that one and we will listen to it.
Chiwenga, who is now vice president of Zimbabwe and retired army general, was part of this transaction that also forced or militarily imposed President Emerson Mnangagwa after he lost an election. You sitting there.
I said the army generals that did the coup, in 2017 are the ones that said we could not have done a coup in order to leave the country in the hands of untested opposition personalities. That's why they then said Emerson Mnangagwa was supposed to be a transitional figure, preparing the way for a ZANU-PF leader who was going to democratically win elections in 2023. You have to give credit to those generals because they didn't rig the 2018 elections. They allowed those elections to play out democratically.
But rigged them at the
on the understanding that that Emerson was popular and was going to garner support. You can only fault them for their action after the election. When then they imposed Emerson, despite the fact that Emerson had lost the election in 2018. That has to be put to them. And we have to get an explanation why they did that. And that also explains why, because Emerson then realized that the army didn't want him to be a presidential candidate. That's why then he brought in the CIO and FAS to run the elections and to rig the elections for him in 2023.
So the 2023 elections were rigged also?
That's the motivation. That's the motivation for him to dump the army from running his campaign in 2023 and roping the CIO and FAS to do that for him. It was because the army had told him in no uncertain terms in 2018 that he was unelectable, he was not popular. He lost the election in 2018, so they couldn't go with him. They couldn't repeat that experiment in 2023. Hence, they had directed the party, and now that General Chiwenga was in the party, they had instructed the party to look for a credible candidate who was electable and who could win the elections in 2023. And this is what Emerson didn't like.
Well, I think it will be better to say in this case here that in 2018, the army played its part in making sure that the elections were rigged, ZANU-PF were retained in power. And as much as the president did not win those 2018 elections and needed to be topped up, and that was done. But 2023, the army was sidelined because they were not happy that their men with whom they believed was going to be the candidate for 2023 for the party had been sidelined. And Mnangagwa got others to help him rig the 2023 elections. But what must be emphasized here is that the party, the army, at no point have they shown any intentions of holding free, fair, and credible elections. That must be understood. Let's just go to another point, which I think it is an important one. And I think it will help clarify a lot of things. This relates to ZEC, the activities of ZEC, the Election Commission, Zimbabwe's Election Commission.
Electoral Commission into disrepute, and also could cause, uncertainty in the security sector when you make such bold allegations.
Yeah, but you don't mention the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and honesty in the same sentence, because this is an electoral management board which was involved in money laundering allegations which amount to more than 2 billion rand, and there's a financial intelligence center report, a South African financial intelligence report to that effect. This is an electoral management board involved in massive money laundering allegations. And if you have those kind of allegations hovering over the chairman of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, if she could facilitate that kind of massive looting of national resources, what stops there from tampering with figures if the preferred presidential candidate loses an election? It's a no-brainer. You have someone who is alleged to have participated in money laundering involving $2 billion United States dollars. There are even audios by Givai saying, no, we are going to give Mother this amount, we are going to give this, sharing the amounts ill-gotten from that transaction with the chairperson of the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. And you tell me that someone who has the guts to involve yourself in such a scandalous money laundering activity and to the tune of 2 billion rand cannot change figures, presidential figures, if she has the military support to do that, and if she has the political support to do that. You tell me that's an impossibility.
So you're basically saying here to me right now, and live to our audiences right now who are listening right now, that having elections in Zimbabwe is just a waste of time. It's the military that decides.
I think that point, yes, man, needs to be emphasized there. We have ZEC, the election commission, that has been heavily compromised. And this comes back to the issue that I was talking about earlier on about the opposition playing along with ZANU-PF. When Chamisa, for instance, assured his followers and the nation at large that he had plugged the vote rigging loopholes to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections in 2023, one wonders, what was he talking about? Did he plug the vote rigging that ZEC could do? Because we have all been saying the same thing, that institutions like ZEC should be independent. And in Zimbabwe, they are not independent. And for somebody to keep on insisting that, yes, we can go ahead with the elections because I've plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, it beggars belief. He could only have been saying all those things knowing fully well that he was lying. I've often played this video clip, and I think it is an important one. We should play it for the sake of completing this story.
Makorokoto Zimbabwe nokuti hakuna munhu anomira kana denga raronga plan. Denga raronga plan, denga harifoiri. Plan yaMwari haifoiri. Ini ndatanga kugadzira cabinet. There is no way we are not going to form a new cabinet. There is no way we are not going to have a celebration. There is no way we are not going to have an inauguration. Let's start preparing for our inauguration. Let's start preparing for our celebration.
Let's restate that point. Chamisa lied when he said he had plugged the vote rigging loopholes. ZEC loopholes could not be plugged, and he clearly did nothing there. He was lying. And we already know why he lied, why he conned millions to participate in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, and knowing fully well that participating would give ZANU-PF legitimacy. He wanted to give ZANU-PF legitimacy, and he gave ZANU-PF legitimacy. I'll just play another clip emphasizing the issue of elections.
I'm not saying that it's a waste of time. I'm saying that if we want to have elections, then we have to make sure that the institutions that are empowered, constitutionally empowered to preside over our elections are free, are impartial, and they are peopled, they are manned by people who are credible and who are not unscrupulous. Elections can still be done and can still be won and can still be done democratically if the ZEC is headed by people, by credible people, people who have not been involved in rigging elections before. So we don't throw away the baby with bathwater. We say, let's reform these institutions. Let's make sure that these institutions operate according to the provisions of the Constitution. And we have credible people at their helm so that when elections are done, the elections reflect the will of the people of Zimbabwe. That's all that is needed. We are not saying that the elections are useless. If we don't do elections, how then do we change leadership? We do coups. No, we have to do elections, but we have to do them properly. We have to make sure that institutions, Chapter 12 institutions that are empowered by the Constitution to hold or to preside over our elections, do so impartially.
That point is an important point. We cannot run away from elections. At the present moment, Zimbabwe will be facing elections in 2028. Forget this ED 2030 agenda. The elections are the important thing. We are facing elections in 2028. We have admitted that our present institutions like ZEC were vital to make sure election processes are free, fair, and credible, have been compromised so badly they cannot deliver free, fair, and credible elections. What is it we should do? That, I believe, is the number one challenge. In this case here, we had the opportunity to reform the SEC, the police, and all the other institutions during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. We failed to implement even one meaningful reform. The price for that, we are stuck. There is no way we're going to implement any meaningful reforms between now and 2028. That is a fact. ZANU-PF has managed to secure a 2/3 majority in Parliament and the Senate, and the chaos in the opposition camp is such that the regime knows that they can count on those opposition senators to vote whichever way they're directed to. And so there is no chance of implementing any meaningful democratic reforms. That is a fact. What do we do then? Well, the only thing we can do is to make sure that we do not participate in a flawed process, which we know we cannot win. The opposition have known this themselves, that they cannot win the election process in Zimbabwe without any meaningful reforms. Is so flawed, so illegal. The only logical step to do is to withdraw. I have said this countless times myself, but I think it's a point that must be said and emphasized again and again and again. Some people have asked, what will that accomplish if we do not participate? Well, if you do not participate in the flawed election process, in this case, we have got a fighting chance, because SADC election observers in 2023, they themselves noted and said clearly that elections in Zimbabwe are flawed. So they already know that. And if we do not participate in our millions, they will then have the opportunity to take that one step further, deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy. This is not a far-fetched idea. The GNU of 2008 to 2013 was a result of the MDs of SADC and the AU refusing to grant ZANU-PF political legitimacy. They didn't make a big song and dance about it. They worked in the background. It is absolutely meaningless to keep on participating in flawed elections. But this is where I come back to what I started about our friend Jealous Mawarire. He is trying to persuade us to focus on this ED 2030 agenda. Let me say this. You cannot do the two things together. It's either you focus on this ED 2030, let's stop them tampering with the Constitution, or you focus on this issue of we are not participating in flawed elections. Because if you get the ordinary people galvanized and mobilized around this issue of stopping ED 2030, you will not be able to stop them participating in 2028 elections. ZANU-PF has been very careful. It doesn't want the nation to focus on free, fair, and credible elections. Mawarire is telling us here that the 2018 elections were free, fair, and credible as far as the parliamentary process was concerned. He is the one who also has admitted that ZEC was compromised. So for 2018, he wants us to believe that ZEC performed their job diligently and competently to make that process free, fair, and credible. It was only for the sake of topping up Mnangagwa that they were compromised. I think that is far-fetched. Because there was no verified voters' roll. And it is the same voters' roll that is used for parliamentary elections as well as for presidential elections. I think it is far-fetched to accept that the army that was involved, and in fact, in this particular case, when you look at 2018 elections, people like Professor Jonathan Moyo have revealed the army's involvement, the army and the CIO involvement in SEC. Here is what Professor Jonathan Moyo had to say on that issue.
Chigumba is the mother of the rigging, and Malaba is the father of the rigging, endorsed what the mother was doing. It is actually scandalous. You see, ZEC is not supposed to be controlled by any authority.
Yeah, it's supposed to be
independent. It is an independent constitutional body. In fact, independent commission. It's a Chapter 12 institution. But ZEC did not run anything important. It never did. The computers were run by Africom. The registration, accreditation, and so forth were run by a CIO company. So between the CIO and the army, they ran
if your competitor is suddenly everywhere,
using
this
their
is why.
instruments. Either Matsanga, who is actually active, she's employed. She joined the, not joined, she was seconded to the electoral body in 2008 as a divisional intelligence officer. Now she is a director in the CIO. As we speak right now, she's a director, and she was congratulated and rewarded for rigging the 2018 election, and she was given a house in Borodale, a posh mansion in there. So there is a serious problem that whereas on paper ZEC is supposed to be an independent constitutional body that runs elections transparently, efficiently, and impartially. No, it doesn't. It doesn't because it does not even itself run. The elections are run for ZEC by the securocrat.
In other ways, to argue that the 2018 elections were free, fair, and credible, that is nonsense. To say that ZEC ran the parliamentary part of those 2018 elections in a professional, efficient, and competent manner is nonsense. What we are fighting here is just two factions of SANU-PF, where the army seems to be backing one side and they want their candidate in. And that army side is wanting to give the impression that they only had to rig the presidential elections because the presidential candidate of SANU-PF was unpopular. But otherwise, they are Democrats. They are not. I just want to conclude and let Jealous Mawarire make his concluding remarks, and then I'll make mine.
So You don't tell me that that ZANU-PF is unanimous in wanting Mnangagwa to stay in office when there are these machinations, even to remove him before 2028.
Thank you very much, Jealous. I just have under a minute for you, Jealous, just to your parting shots. Under a minute.
Thank you very much. I would love to urge the people of Zimbabwe to unite in 2026 and to make sure that we fight those malcontents that are trying to mutilate our constitution. The constitution of Zimbabwe it provides the guidelines on how the country is supposed to be run. Anyone who wants to mutilate the constitution for whatever reason, and even for the reason of saying that we want a cooling off period, like what Professor Moyo and the cabal behind the Breaking Barriers Initiative are saying, they have to be resisted because the constitution should be sacrosanct. The constitution should be there and should not be changed in order to pursue selfish political agendas of people that have been looting our country. We have to stop those that want to violate the constitution, and we also have to stop the hemorrhaging, financial hemorrhaging, which is happening in the country. We also have to stop the illegal exportation of our mineral resources, of our lithium, of our chrome, of our gold, of our platinum, all those mineral resources that God gave us to develop our country. We need to guard them jealously and to make sure that they benefit the people of Zimbabwe. And we have to make sure that Parliament, we have to make sure that government is accountable, because right now we are being taxed, particularly the health tax. It gives me a lot of heart pain because more than 35 million is collected every year from taxation of the phone calls that we do.
I'll stop it there. I think it is important here that we understand what fight we are involved in. Because unless we understand the fight we are in, we are not going to win it. The issue is twofold. 2028 elections are going ahead with not even one reform implemented, with the same ZEC that even Mawarire himself is condemned as compromised. His qualification on that they are compromised, is that they will let the parliamentary leg of it go without being tampered with. Or they've done that in 2018 at least. And he is also wants to assure us that if ZANU-PF was elect a candidate that is acceptable to the people, there will be no rigging because that candidate would win. The truth of the matter is the rigging will still go ahead. In other words, we are being sold here a falsehood. We are being asked to focus on the stopping Mnangagwa extending his stay in power beyond 2028. And if we're to do that, we'll live happily ever after. That is nonsense. Stopping Mnangagwa will only mean that the party or the army will finally have their own candidate now as the presidential candidate. And they are not going to let anybody else win those elections other than their own candidate. The elections will still be rigged. Our focus should be on making sure we have free, fair, and credible elections. Forget this ED 2030. It is of little advantage to the ordinary Zimbabwean, whether it's Mnangagwa who is there in power beyond 2028 or some other dictator. We are being sold the same foolish, false choice that we were sold in 2017, when people were made to believe that replacing ZANU-PF or Mugabe with Mnangagwa was a wise move. We all know it was not. The wise move would have been to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship. The wise move now would be to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, not swapping one dictator for another. If we focus on making sure 2028 elections are free, fair, and credible, or we do not participate, we will be killing two birds with one stone. If we force ZANU-PF to accept that 2028 elections are not free, fair, and credible, and we are forced into a GNU, even if we had failed to stop Mnangagwa tampering with the constitution, it doesn't matter, because the GNU is not a ZANU-PF government. And that GNU Mnangagwa would know that he cannot dictate to that GNU. That GNU's primary purpose will be to implement the long-awaited democratic reforms to put Zimbabwe back on a democratic footing. That is the reality. I think Mawarire is playing his deceptive game, the same game he played in 2013, when he set out to encourage the elections to go ahead, knowing fully well that without reforms, those elections will be absolutely meaningless. He was serving ZANU-PF's interests. He's serving ZANU-PF's interests now by encouraging the people to focus on this ED 2030 agenda, when what we should be focusing on is making sure that 2028 elections, if they go ahead without reforms, we do not participate. Mobilize the people to around this ED 2030 agenda, and you will not stop them participating in 2028. And if they participate in 2028, they will give ZANU-PF legitimacy. That is the reality. And it is academic whether Mnangagwa is the dictator after that or somebody else. he will still be stuck with the ZANU-PF dictatorship. ZANU-PF will rig 2028 if there are no reforms. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.